Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. It's been a bit since I contributed again, and again, my summer continues to be busy. So, just kind of as a public service announcement, if before we get started, if you want to see more of me, I am committing to do at least 3 videos a month over on Patreon, no matter what happens on YouTube. And these are videos that are going to get censored on YouTube anyway. So if I drop off the face of the planet again on YouTube, that's where you can find me. But the stuff that I wanted to get into today, again, I committed to all of you that when I saw blatant things related to V-Steganography, I'd let you know, even if I was busy this summer. So here we are. And just like my last few videos, the purpose of this is to arm you guys, everybody, you gals as well, with info so you can decode what's happening in your environment, not get mired in details that don't matter, and see through the psyop that's happening with the 5 senses, the hijacking of the mind. V5 in numeral in Roman numeral. For those that again are new to the channel, if you're really new to the channel, like I always do, just go back, even watch the playlists on my channel, especially the ones that I created. Where are they? Oh yeah, Earth Grid Control Network and the year 2020 year zero. I didn't realize that it was tougher to delineate which ones were mine. But these two are mine. I've also made some other ones around some other concepts and such. But ultimately, the concepts we're going to be revolving around today are kind of like in the last few videos I've done, realm of kind of, or I thought this was going to be a season finale of sorts, but we're going to get into the Slavic lore here today, as is alluded to with this whole Russian-centered story. If you go back to that video, you'll reach my suppositional conclusions of how the slavery, wordplay contributes to the psyop that we're living through right now. And that's what I'm seeing here, guys, but in a good way, from Vladimir Putin, who on V-Day, Victory Day from World War II, just last week, wrote an article, speech-type article, that hit on the national interest outlet. I'll link this in the description, June 18th, 2020, in preparation for this June 22nd celebration. Russia had to postpone the Victory Day parade this year from May all the way until June 22nd. There's perhaps some significance to the dates lining up as they are, but more importantly, there's some weird stuff pertaining to history, the historical concepts of how the truth has been conveyed especially in the Anglo-Germanic world in the last 100 years. And Vladimir Putin's kind of laying the gauntlet down to ultimately tell truth, calling out all the world leaders to join in this effort. So we're going to pick apart why that's important throughout the video, only so you guys can see kind of the narrative that's happening behind the scenes of this whole second wave of coronavirus that's coming, what's going on. And then also, we're going to lead down the path leading to the gold, which we've talked about earlier in the year 2020 videos. Those ones that are kind of back in this realm, 4 months ago around the Super Bowl, the silver rig ritual and the Bitcoin reset, and gold being a huge part of that, and Bix Weir's work being vindicated once again. We'll kind of conclude here today. But V-Day. V-Steganography is at play here, obviously, because the proper nouns are being used with V. And so what is the mechanism by which our senses are being swayed in a direction of, and that's what we need to perform an investigative analysis on, what Vladimir Putin's truly saying around the event this year. So I establish the Zero Hedge article here before we move away from it entirely, only to suggest that there is, let's say, pragmatism playing very largely into certain world powers' ways that they're going about the world, or world relations. The United States doesn't seem to be one of those that is doing anything pragmatic, as we're seeing with the way our social order is coming apart. Russia's social order is not coming apart in the same way, at least this time around. But they've lived through this before, and they know a thing or two. But Venezuela, huge into trade relations with Russia, who are attempting to create kind of a new stance for Russia as a world power, militarily, with oil. Venezuela is the biggest store of oil. So that's what this is all about. It's part of the tapestry of the story. Of course, Venezuela isn't key to what we're getting into today with ancient history contexts. But in order to go through Putin's speech or article that he wrote, I've actually copied and pasted it so I can highlight it better, highlight the V proper nouns so we can talk about whether they're significant or not, along with some of the key concepts that lead to what we need to investigate and keep in mind throughout the rest of this year. Because, like I've prescribed before, this all leads to the space tech unveiling, guys. All this stuff around the Super Bowl with Boeing collapsing, the Space Force, or at the beginning of the year, I was talking all about this with the Stephen Quast presentations. All of these concepts are coalescing. I don't have time to go over all of them. And I also don't want to waste too much time, because I seem to do that sometimes in the videos, kind of to set the stage for the de-occulting investigations that we do, because they are a little bit complex otherwise. And then it makes these videos a little bit inaccessible if you come to them for the first time. So that's why I always reference back. But ultimately, the conclusions we're going to get out of this harken back to a couple concepts that we've been talking about. The Wetiko virus, we're going to read a little bit more, actually a little bit further into the book from the passages I was reading last time. We'll go through those, see how those play in to things happening on the world stage, and of course the alternate versions of history that we've talked about with Vladimir Putin's countryman, Anatoly Fomenko. All this is coupled in with Russia and China, and it's deep, guys. So we're not going to go through all 6 pages of this, as you can see, 6 pages long. I'll link the original article, but we will paraphrase all 6 pages. I'm going to go through this because what Vladimir Putin is essentially saying at the heart of the message, before we even get into it, so you can contextualize, is that there's an immense amount of history, especially around the pre-war period of 1945, of World War II, and the post-war period. This is when FDR was president. This is when Winston Churchill was prime minister. This is when Stalin was those in the West would call the dictator of the Communist Party in Russia. Okay, this is also just before the Cold War period, of course, which immediately followed, involving Russia. So Vladimir Putin brilliantly lines all of these things out, but with a narrative that does not really refute the current believed history about World War II and the jockeying of the powers at the time. Poland plays a huge part as a nation that was manipulated into stealing Czechoslovakia from the, let's call it, Soviet powers at the time, and commandeering that territory in this very elaborate but politically intriguing sort of scenario that wasn't very diplomatic. This is to say, the Nazis screwed over the Soviets several times in a diplomatic setting, even before World War II even began. And Vladimir Putin paints this out because the narrative would suggest in the history books in the Anglo-Germanic world, as he labels those of us in the royalty subjugation, as you might say, these people in their history books, that's us as these people in the United States, we're a part of these people. They don't tell the whole story about how things were provoked, but also lending credence to how things were provoked after World War I. He speaks about the Bolshevik subterfuge that created the necessity for things to respond the way they did. in Russia in Soviet times. And in this way, he does not condone anything that happened during those communist years to follow, but does offer the explanation as to why things got the way they did in Russia. He paints out just how many people in Russia were lost, and a call to arms to, like Russia, do the same in investigating this history, because it's in record and we're able to bring this stuff out en masse if we wanted to as a world society, and tell the truth at long last about the deep dark cobwebs that surround World War II. Does it involve the Vatican Library? Is it an Indiana Jones-like scenario? I think it is, like we're always going to suppose on this channel. But the Slavic Russian races have a huge part to play in the current war that we're facing. So like I said, I was highlighting the V's. That's your summary for this article. But the V's that are in here, victory is capitalized, obviously, as a victory day. So it's significant that we're pointing to this as the day that this message is coming out. And this blue section is the first part that corroborates what I just said. In Putin's own words, he says, "We have a responsibility to our past and our future to do our utmost to prevent those horrible tragedies from happening ever again," referring to the Holocausts of World War II period, and the mass murder of the Russian people. Russia lost 1 in 7 citizens. I mean, the stats are in here somewhere. I think I've highlighted it, but we'll get to those. I think that they lost 1 in 7 citizens, where the United States, by comparison, lost 1 in 270 citizens. Britain lost like 1 in 120 citizens, just for comparison's sake. So their losses were tremendous. And so what he's also saying is these tragedies, they befell the Russian population and hit them way harder than anywhere else in the world because of how much they had to face the Nazi war machine. So anyway, hence, he says, "I was compelled to come out with an article about World War II and the Great Patriotic War," is what they refer to it colloquially as in Russia. "I have discussed this idea on several occasions with world leaders, and they have showed their support. The summit of CIS leaders held at the end of last year, we all agreed on one thing. It is essential to pass on to future generations the memory of the fact that the Nazis were defeated first and foremost by the Soviet people, and the representatives of all republics of the Soviet Union fought side by side together in their heroic battle, both on the front lines and in the rear. During that summit, I also talked with my counterparts about challenging the pre-war period. So what he's saying here is because those statistics I just gave you should give you some perspective. Just how many people got lost in the pre-war period and during the war, the hands of Russia. Without Russia, who knows what would have happened on a worldwide stage with the Nazis, is one thing that you might infer from this. Like, he's saying thank God for those people, his ancestors from a couple of generations ago, his countrymen that defended the motherland, because where would the rest of the world even be if that hadn't been the case, if they hadn't made that sacrifice? And it's essential for them to be glorified because they're forgotten about, and he even talks further along about how atrocious it is if you can't remember those who gave that ultimate sacrifice, which is, really what respecting your veterans and stuff is all about. Another V word, by the way, right? That gets termed in all sorts of different ways. And anyway, that's what he's saying here. He's not really wanting to challenge the narrative at this level for any other reason other than to give the respect owed to those that fought that war, because they've been forgotten to a false narrative. He basically goes here, says, at the same time there were many emotional outbursts, poorly disguised insecurities, and loud accusations. He's talking about how the squabbling of the historical period, right, to follow after World War II, as to what the truth would come out to be in school books and such. So he talks also several times about these facts about they've accessed their archives and they're backing this up with fact on their archives, their archival documents. Much like Anatoly Fomenko fastidiously cites everything that he does and goes and compares against and references with data points to a science. History can be scientifically thought out for accuracy's sake, which the Russians would appear have, if we're just generalizing, more of an impetus to do. That would seem, based on this evidence, than a lot of other countries or nations in the world have. But this is what he's calling for those to do by saying how many times throughout that Russia is accessing their archives to bring out these actual informations, to reflect on the complicated events of history. So, also advocating for avoiding the ideological politicized speculations that may occur. So we have to be careful of this ourselves, because we're talking about mind control and such. And of course, we look at and ascribe these programs to the CIA and governing bodies like this. But we've got to remain, throughout knowing what the V-Steganography conveys, we also have to remain steadfast in not succumbing to the sensationalism of it, because that is where your mind's chitta, like we've talked about in this video here, the chitta of the mind, keeping it smooth, keeping it glassy smooth, so you can concentrate, be clear with your thought, and be critical with your thought. You avoid that by not getting sensational. So here's another, of course, he talks much about the legacy of Versailles, the lack of oversight, accountability for the League of Nations that followed after World War I, that allowed these vacuums to coalesce the way they did, unabatedly, in such a short period of time, to follow World War I. You know, within 20 years, you've got another conflict. So he's pointing to a lot of these key markers here, whether he's even aware of it or not. See, the thing about Vladimir Putin is that I also have to understand is he's maybe just an agent of somebody who's higher up than he even is, right? Like, I don't know, but whatever's being conveyed here, whether somebody was ghostwriting this or whether it was by Vladimir Putin's hand himself, they're pointing to these key markers all throughout this document. The Versailles World Order they put down here. The same thing, right? The treaty after World War II, World War I, that the League of Nations should have policed situation better to prevent the things from playing out the way they did. So we go down to the document, several pages beyond, come to some next relevance here related to the historical stuff and the V-Steganography in particular. So nowadays, he says, we hear lots of speculations and accusations against modern Russia in connection with the non-aggression pact signed back then. And he's speaking to the non-aggression pact between the nuclear powers when Stalin was at the head of the Soviet Union. Yes, he says, Russia is the legal successor state to the USSR in the Soviet period, with all its triumphs and tragedies, is an inalienable part of our 1,000-year-long history. So, a couple cool things he's saying here. 1,000-year-long history. He's pointing to something. There's the history reference again. How much history does Anatoly Fomenko argue to have been deleted, added, that we need to delete out of history in order to get the true representation of chronology? 1,000 years. Said a different way, Anatoly Fomenko, through his research, concludes that the Catholic Church, through a couple of monk agents around the time of Constantine and the Council of Nicaea, added 1,000 years of history, kind of copy-paste style, with other, themes being similar to other periods of time. And this creates the auspice that we're under right now, where we've got actually about 1,000 years since Jesus at this point, not 2,000 is what that would infer. And Vladimir Putin's pointing to the fact that their 1,000-year-long history has something to do with us investigating said history. It's very interesting, guys, because ultimately what I see here is you got the Orthodox Church centralized there, which they're building in the classic form of the onion-shaped domes. I didn't bring up the example of that. Perhaps I should have for this video. I won't bother with it right now, but they're reconstructing these things. I don't know the methods they're using, but these elaborate cathedral churches for the Orthodox Church are being reconstructed again too, which points back to, like I was saying, we've talked about the ancient area there being reference to the Slavic peoples called Tartary, the Tartarian Empire. So anytime I highlighted it in green here, it's kind of in reference to the steganography itself. And so here, the steganography of V itself, rather than the historical context, is what I was kind of separating in blue. So he says a couple paragraphs later, besides, we do not know if there were any secret protocols or annexes to agreements of a number of countries with the Nazis. The only thing that is left to do is to take their word for it. In particular, materials pertaining to the secret Anglo-German talks still have not been declassified. Therefore, we urge all states to step up the process of making their archives public and publishing previously unknown documents of war and pre-war periods, the way Russia has done it in recent years. In this context, we are ready for broad cooperation and joint research projects engaging historians. They've got the historians that have investigated this stuff. And kind of what he's saying is he's just looking for collaboration to corroborate what they really already know about this Anglo-German conspiracy that's pervaded even since before World War II. This goes all the way back again to the Fed. This is like 120 years, over 100 years we've been dealing with this crap, with this money system the way it is. And we've talked about said money system being something that breaks down with the Bitcoin and the fake gold that's out there. This is something, again, we're gonna come back to by the end of this. Let it be known. Remember, a little bit of a clue: the Belt and Road Initiative for China. Russia was a huge piece of that, of their success. Russia was a bigger part of the success of that initiative than China was because of where it's located. And we're going to talk about that as it relates and how key Russia really is in the coming world. The Vistula is a river in Russia. I was going to say the Soviet Union, but in current modern day Russia, that he's pointing to. Again, in this article. The reason why I highlight the V's there, the proper noun usage of V words in this article, or this speech, whatever you want to call it, the fact that they're used with the prevalence that they are, with the with the preponderance, there we go, the word I was looking for, that they are, points to the fact that we need to look at this with the lens of steganography. I'm just pointing to why is he mentioning specifically parts about the war which have to do with the Vistula River. It's an important demarcation line in the war, but he's specifically calling it into his tapestry he's weaving. There's Versailles mentioned again. So a couple of key points that we want to kind of close this article out with. He says, the Second War did not happen overnight, nor did it start unexpectedly or all of a sudden. And German aggression against Poland was not out of nowhere. It was the result of a number of tendencies and factors of the world policy of that time. Remember when I told you at the beginning, we kind of, because he has to paint the narrative of what happened with Poland over several pages, I just told you what it was all about up front. And he's telling you that German aggression goes against Poland didn't come out of nowhere, because they were scheming this for years beforehand, is what he's talking about. But all pre-war events fell into place to form one fatal chain, kind of like a tapestry, And he's saying everybody was a part of history. Nobody is ultimately to blame. We're all to blame for the outcomes of World War II. But undoubtedly, the main factors that predetermined the greatest tragedy in the history of mankind were state egoism, cowardice, appeasement of the aggressor, who was gaining strength, and unwillingness of political elites to search for a compromise. And he points those things out, I think, very keenly, because these are the things that we have not gotten over as a society or as a humanity even today. This is why we're arguing over stupid stuff. Like who's right and who's wrong about certain perspectives. Everybody has been taken by this whole money narrative. Black people, of course, have been taken to certain degrees deeper than anybody else, and this is what they feel, and this is a truth, actually. The black community has been exploited way more in today's day and age than anyone might fathom to want to comprehend that is also not a black person already, right? The concepts I want people to understand is the concept of slavery is not new. This is perhaps the best time to call up that in the investigations of this chronology, and affirmed by archaeologists like Robert Sepper, that the area that occupies the Caucasus Mountains today was known as Africa at the time that all this history was deleted. It was a simple label, a conjectured label swap that happened somewhere along the way in the Roman Anglo-German society that has persisted. That's the amalgamation of the ancient Roman society now. That truly we need to kind of look into, because the word slavery portends a use case against the Slavic people. And so that's my appeal to people that are going to come to this or that scenario, white or black scenario. I'm going to say that if we all take Putin's advice here and truly look into history with a new lens and go against the propaganda campaign. There's so much propaganda out there against Anatoly Fomenko's work. And to my ability to read bullshit, this does not seem like bullshit to me. Going through all 5 of these novels, he's incredibly fastidious about his scientific process. He does not set up his experiments with false presumptions. It's true scientific method that they're doing this historical research by. And if we can look at this with that lens, then we will be able to find out the truth of what slavery is. Because it's always been, if the label of the Caucasus Mountains is where we're focusing the attention of the use on that, and that was called Africa, then it's just a sleight of hand. Slavic Americans are also technically, by that label, African Americans. Black Americans who came from modern day Africa in the slave trade that happened, as we know it, with colonial America, came hundreds of years after this. Whatever Putin's pointing at to the ancient history, what we're gonna do deeper investigations with when we do the Z Steganography series. I won't leave you guys hanging on these topics, because there are things to know about the wars that persisted in ancient times in the Tartarian Empire, and the Mongols being those very Slavic people, not Asian in nature. This is all false history that's been layered on top of more false history, and we're all more the same than anybody knows, if you can look at it that way. Like, you can just, people always talk about the slavery that existed in Egypt. It's not comparable. Like, black people are dealing with it today, so it's at the forefront of the social order because it's happening now. But we can all perhaps band together, is what I'm saying, to figure this thing out and not let the V-Steganography take over us. It's going to come out with movies that are coming out right now as well. We're going to get to this tie-in with the Mongols that I've just been talking about here in a second, why this matters to a movie that's come out with Johnny Depp called Waiting for the Barbarians. But we're going to finish out what Putin's saying here, because I really want to drive this home before ending this portion of the video. And I'm, like I said, I was dedicating all the time to picking this apart, and I hope that it's cohesive enough for you guys to get, because we're going to bring it home again with like what's happening on the metaphysical level with Wetiko, as it relates to the Chinese component of this too. It's all very complex tapestry. So let me attempt to put this all together in a way that you guys can take value from. So Putin says, saying this, I by no means intend to take on the role of a judge, to accuse, acquit anyone, let anyone initiate a new round of international information confrontation in the historical field that could set countries and peoples at loggerheads. He doesn't want to cause conflict. He wants people to collaborate. He does not want this to be a point of contention for people to find another reason to disagree. That's what he's saying. I believe that it is academics with a wide representation of respected scientists from different countries of the world who should search for a balanced assessment of what happened. That's what we do. We compare perspectives. This is all really well and good. We all need the truth and objectivity. On my part, I've always encouraged my colleagues to build calm, open, and trust-based dialogue, to look at the common past in a self-critical, unbiased manner. Look at the common past in a self-critical and unbiased manner. Again, that's what I'm hoping this research gives you all, is a way to look at these things, know how to interpret them through the V filter, in other words, and think critically, only with this filter. It's not the only filter you can use, it's not what I'm saying, but you know, that's what we specialize on. Anyway, such an approach will make it possible not to repeat the errors committed back then and to ensure peaceful and successful development for years to come. I don't know about you guys, but this sounds like a guy who has a vision for what he wants to happen with the world. And it's the betterment of everybody. Does Putin seem like such a bad guy in this article? Everybody might need to ponder on that. He goes into the hypocrisy. We don't need to read this word by word. He also goes actually into the declassification further of documents, how they've done it and declassified their documents, and which letters were pertinent to understanding the war from the perspectives that he is. And he also talks about not letting the Soviets off the hook, like I was saying, because things happened that shouldn't be forgiven. He doesn't condone anything that truly happened. Really, he simply looks at things pragmatically today to move forward from it. So he goes further into more evidence of how aggressive Hitler was truly against Russia, and so kind of had Russia in his focus. Had some more V-Steganography with Victory, the Volga region, which has a part to play in all this, Volga. And that kind of concludes, actually, yeah, he's talking about us trusting each other for future generations. That kind of concludes the sentiments I was hoping to get across. He talks about the Treaty of Versailles. I didn't highlight that, or I thought I highlighted this, but guys, the Treaty of Versailles was definitely an economic psyop, right? This guy right here, John Maynard Keynes. Keynesian economics. The concepts of this person got us into the mess that we are in. The Fed plus Keynesian economics as a doctrine equals the situation that we're in right now. So we are not going to go into the politics of the Treaty of Versailles more than the point it was mentioned in his article, Putin's, several times. And I just wanted to point to its significance being of one of economic importance, because it ties to what's happening here with China. Before we get to that, I mentioned that Waiting for the Barbarians is coming out. This is a movie with Johnny Depp. Here's the Johnny Depp character, very kind of black fascist. He's got an X right on his forehead. Type of suit here, so there's some Steganography even going on. But this is a book that they made a movie into. The timing couldn't have been better, and it revolves around stories. It talks about this magistrate that's in the settlement near the frontier of the empire, on the borders of the empire. This is the Tartarian Empire that they're talking about. The book was influenced by the Tartar Steppe, which is a novel from the 40s. This book was written in 1980, so 40 years after this. And it is about the whole area in the Himalayas and above and all of Siberia, of which the Tartarian Empire occupied. And these people were red-haired Slavic people, more colloquialized as the Mongols. The representations that we have of the Mongols come out of China as Asians, but it's a simple perspective check on our parts that we need to look at. Anytime back then China was drawing any people, they all had Chinese eyes. Every person. They just didn't see or draw people differently than themselves. And so all the accounts that we have of these Mongol hordes invading China and the reason they built the Great Wall and all this stuff is not this barbaric people. They were painted in propaganda, likely, as this, but these were the Slavic people. So the way they're portrayed in the movie, of course, is also as these Asian-looking Mongols. So there's propaganda going out into these films in plain sight. I'm going to have to watch this one when it comes out. I'll link the trailer in the video. The magistrate, it should be known, kind of gets reformed, I guess, throughout it. This is the magistrate that runs the settlement, and this guy, Johnny Depp's character, is the guy to come in and strike law and order the situation because the barbarian horde is coming. They have to secure this encampment. So it just kind of goes back to hearken of what it points to, guys, is the very history that Vladimir Putin wants uncovered. We have a false representation of history here. There's a whole host of political intrigue that we have no idea of what happened back here. But man, am I intrigued to find out what's at the bottom of this mystery. What happened in the Tartarian Empire to cause a war of two cultures? Let's call them the Anglo-Germanic versus the Slavic cultures. What happened to cause this clash back then? And this is of course going to be after Atlantis fell. If Anatoly Fomenko is correct, he's also correctly, I think, pointed out that Egypt was just what Rome stole all their concepts from after Rome kind of got corrupted. All the Hermetic concepts got absorbed there and bastardized. What's been bastardized here? Again, that's the ultimate question. The tapestry of the clues point us to an economic situation that's going to be the catalyst for breaking the spell. And part of that deals, again, guys, I persist to, if you go back to my other videos, these videos will also, these three right here, Silver Rig Ritual, Baby Yoda, Coronavirus, this is the first coronavirus video we did. These videos will lead you on to Bix Weir's work on the Road to Ruta, where he ties this whole theory of what's happening right now with China's system. There's a Chinese riddle related to the Grand Canyon, which I'll just leave at that because that's his work over there, and it connects only to reference the gold money reset, the Bitcoin reset, in the riddles that we've identified as playing out in those videos. So this is all coming together to suggest China may be odd man out in the geopolitical realm. If this fakery, this veiling fake system, the The system that is China's Communist Party, just like the Stalinist Communist Party, it fell apart. Communism really doesn't work very well. And I think that's what we're going to find here. History repeat itself in China. Russia being this postmodern, like almost true republic in the sense that Plato would argue for, like it's kind of Neo-Platonistville over there. The early stages of it, but there's a mass awakening over in the public, I think, in Russia. And what we can determine here is, what I suspect is that Russia is not going to want to deal with China, with this Belt and Road Initiative, and they're actually going around China to Japan, and they're going with all these powers around China to circumvent all of that. China may get cut out of the manufacturing. They've already cut themselves out of the manufacturing with this whole Wuhan bioweapon conspiracy that they've engineered, but the spell kind of fizzling. You're seeing all of this rejiggering happening, and this is just a clue that whatever was in place with China becoming a new world power, I think that's in jeopardy. We'll see in the days to come, but watch out for this movie. I'll go more into it when the time comes. But some fun stuff here before I end this video on the Wetiko stuff, because it's a little bit heavier for kind of bringing it home. Keep an eye on the symbolism going on in football. We're talking about how the wordplay is being used with the word slavery and Africa, the label of which being part of two different regions. The Caucasus Mountains 1,000 years ago, now it's the continent of Africa. Okay? So African Americans, in that sense, interesting, right? Just depending on the label, could be looked at as Slavic or white, or black and from current day Africa. So the Black Panther, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on with the Black Panther Party. The X on Johnny Depp's brow, forgot where I kind of put that. There it was. The X on his brow, like Malcolm X. There's X steganography here too. It goes into, the X Protect stuff of Daniel Licht's work over on Dark Journalist channel. Look over there for more on X steganography. But there's some signaling that's happening here with Cam Newton going from the Black Panther faction and integrating with the Patriot faction, because he signed a deal with the New England Patriots. We talked earlier this year about how Tom Brady going from the Patriots over to the Templars, the Buccaneers, also indicated a changing of the factional guard behind the curtain, out of plain view. We need to keep an eye on this, as it could signify these two political agendas melding, because the Patriots, of course, were truly established. Their current Patriot kind of upwelling of what this meme has come to mean since the Patriot Act was passed in the George W. Bush regime, kind of goes back to label that Bush power. So we're looking at Black Panthers melding with Patriots. The other quarterback we've talked about recently, also #1, was Warren Moon, and the Moon rituals going on around the Glass-Steagall Super Bowl from 2 years ago. So there's a lot of stuff going on in the NFL that's going to give us some clues as to how to interpret this stuff when more plays out. But I'm just showing you guys, this just happened a couple of days ago, and it's significant that all of these changes are happening in these iconographic fashions in the sports arena. The other one is the Antonio Brown story, who's number 17. Remember, number 17 is Q, and V is, as we've shown, also a cipher piece for showing the true agenda of Q, which, like in the comic book V for Vendetta, is one of kind of a Stockholm Syndrome nature. So 17, where is he going to land? Is he going to go with the Seahawks and the secret space program faction? Is kind of what, remember Seattle, Boeing, how the Seahawk resembles the B-2 bomber, and all this stuff is at the beginning of this year's Year Zero videos. This playlist here, I'll link it in the description like I always do, 2020 Year Zero. Or is he going to go to the Buccaneers? That's the other thing they were talking about today. Is he going to go to the Buccaneers? And is number 17 going to go then be with Tom Brady? And then if number 17, we'll have to track Antonio Brown's number. What number does he wear and where does he go? That will basically tell us how the factions are jockeying and where. And we'll get into that later maybe when I can make more videos next year. But before I let you go, we're going to read some passages from the Wetiko book, Dispelling Wetiko, that give you guys all a better understanding of these glyphs, because I did a video on my Patreon channel about the Z Steganography last time around, a couple weeks ago, that revolved around Dragon Ball Z and awakening the creativity that's in us. And the way that we fight whatever spells are playing out in the normal realm here is to recognize things like what Putin is saying, take our minds to action and to task to break the spells that are happening, and kind of educate yourself enough to where they don't have any effect on you. That's what this deciphering this is all about. De-occulting this is all about. Is to break the spell of your mind so the mind control does not affect you anymore. And if you're simply aware of it, the Jedi mind control doesn't work. And I think it's appropriate that Chapter 3 is called Under a Collective Spell. And so some of the excerpts that I'm going to be reading will kind of I'll tie back into the concepts we've already talked to today for why it matters. And then it's going to be a perfect segue, again, because the PS5 decode that I'll do and put over on my YouTube channel, or not my YouTube channel, my Patreon channel, will be very, very focused then on everything we're going in here. So just like I have been doing, this is kind of like part 1. That'll kind of be like part 2. But it's key that the focus is unlocking your creative ability instead of letting Wetiko take over you. And we'll talk about what that means. So on page 47, a very Masonic number to start on, in fact, for the book, of the chapter Under a Collective Spell, Paul Levy writes, whenever the contents of the collective unconscious become activated, they have an unsettling effect on the conscious mind of everyone. And remember, in the last video, we did talk about Wetiko. What Wetiko is the unconscious evil that is the temptation that comes through in our vices, in our addictions, in things that keep us from elevating our chakra system to its highest form and activating it through our heart. That's what the V Steganography is designed to do, is keep us in our 5 senses and in our root chakra and in the material from raising through. Activating our yellow power, our courage, gets us through our love center and into the area between our heart and our throat chakra, into creativity. Teal, the mix between blue and green. That's the kind of where we're going at with this. But remember, Wetiko keeps us in V. Wetiko is what is a spiritual infection of the unconscious mind of almost the entire population. It's what we're awaking to right now. It's what the apocalypse is to activate your Super Saiyan creativity to overcome it. So it's collective, is what Paul Levy's saying, though. We all swim in this psychic soup to overcome it. And this is what Jesus pointed out, and why the law of grace is so important to creating this type of activity in our action. When the psychic dynamic is not consciously metabolized, not just with an individual but collectively, the mental state of the people as a whole might well be compared to a psychosis, which we're under right now. If it's not identified as such, if we don't recognize that we're under this spell, if we don't recognize that this whole idea of slavery for only one race of people, if that persists, then we're not going to understand that we're all enslaved. The most useful slave is, in fact, the slave who does not know he's a slave. So, if for that sense, white people need to wake up too, because at least in the black communities, they understand that they've been enslaved in the past. It's the white people who've been duped, and they're way more entrenched in the spell. I actually have more hope that the black people are going to make bigger difference quicker because they're taking more action. In fact, the only white people you see are the Antifa type of guys that are hindering the process by design, by the money changers, right? So we have to recognize it, is what Paul Levy's saying, in order for us to overcome it. Is step one. Okay, here he says on page 50. He's continuing on with his thoughts. He says, a psychic epidemic is a closed system. So the collective psychosis that we're under, it's a closed system. It's an echo chamber, you might be able to say, which is to say that it is an insular and not open to any new information or informing influences from the outside world, which contradict its fixed, limited, and limiting perspective. In a codependent, self-perpetuating feedback loop, any reflection that is offered from others, rather than being reflected upon, utilized, and integrated in a way that supports the growth and evolution of that system, is perversely misinterpreted to support the agreed-upon delusion, binding the collective psychosis together. So that's a fancy way of saying any reason, logic, and compassional rationalization that you can add, like these videos are to the scenario, they're met with resistance to consider, because Wetiko itself does not want the psychosis spell to be broken. Wetiko is that energy that you can actually inform yourself if in a better way that Darth Vader succumbed to go to the dark side. It's that subtle temptation for power that was fueled by Palpatine, of course, but he succumbed to the dark side. Instead, like we've talked about also in the video I did on Patreon, where Rey, with the yellow lightsaber, activated her yellow courage instead and blasted through to become the Sentinel. Darth Vader was down here. Luke Skywalker approached him from up here and was a little bit too big for his britches. He wasn't ready, and he got his arm chopped off. We went through this on my channel all before, about how the myth plays out in Star Wars, but it's important for the template it lays for humankind to break the Wetiko virus as well, to break the dark side of the spell. This is what Steve Jobs was going up against Bill Gates with for his whole career. We've pointed that out too. But back to the text here. When you're insulated in these echo chambers, this is what the Q narrative is. When I bring the V Steganography to people that inherently believe in Q, it's so hard for them to come to grips with the fact that they've been duped. They'll defend it. It becomes religion after that, and religion becomes very powerful. So notice that that's what's happening with Antifa, that's what's happening with Q, that's what's happening with Black Lives Matter, that's what's happening with any of these groups that we're looking at making a big splash these days. They're all consumed by Wetiko. On page 54, he lays out the concept of the big Wetikos, people of great power and influence that are also consumed by this idea of the Wetiko virus. He calls them the big Wetikos. And on page 54, he says, the big Wetikos are the levers of power, be they the super wealthy CEOs of corporations, bank presidents, or leaders of nation states. The CIA? You know, they are particularly dangerous because they frame and define the terms of our dialogue by choosing the metaphors which dominate the agreed upon historical narrative. There it is, the historical narrative. Paul Levy's talking about the exact thing that Vladimir Putin is saying in his article here that we need to be very cognizant of. In fact, if we can correct for history and give everybody this new fresh perspective, Wetiko, a lot of the work gets done for us because Wetiko doesn't have a hold to take grip on in the minds of people. Mind control is less effective if we simply paint a better historical narrative that makes more sense because it's truthful. Managing our perceptions through the propaganda engines, he continues, of the mainstream corporate media which they control, the big Wetikos in positions of power craft the limits and parameters of our conversations and debates. So here we are again. Wetiko, the dark side energies are being used by the elite to frame our minds around events that are happening. Debate the context as you may. That is what is happening here. I continue. Wetiko is an ideological virus whose means of replication and propagation is through altering the syntax of our ideas. This is what a cult is. This is what occult symbolism is, right? Wetiko deviates our mental syntax, the rules of how we form language, thereby distorting our semantics, the meaning we place on our experience of ourselves and the world. So that's a good way of saying, by putting something like V innocuously into the narrative, and us not knowing what it means, part of it we do through the V steganography and V deciphering. But if you don't, those spells simply set in and they change your semantics, which changes the meaning by which you ascribe to your experience in the world, which means everything. So by that, he says that Wetiko is a semantic disorder. So we have to understand meaning, we have to understand myth more to understand ourselves. We have to understand archetype. Joseph Campbell, everyone. Read Joseph Campbell's work if you really need to get to the heart of that matter before. Or Jordan Peterson, spelling our words. We've talked about that too. The spells that are cast by spelling words. On page 58, he continues, like we've talked about with the Wizard of Oz battles. Like a magician or evil wizard, the people behind the scenes create smokescreens to divert the public's attention from what they are really doing. What are those people really doing? What was Putin talking about when he was saying, let's figure out the historical context, unlock your creativity to find out? This is an outer reflection of how the Wetiko bug, once it takes over an individual psyche, works its black magic of deception. If we fall under the spell being cast, we then marginalize, don't engage with, and don't notice the underlying corruption which those in overt positions of power are both an expression of and smokescreen for. So it's saying that those that are most consumed by Wetiko are defending it, the dark side, outside of any principalities. They're just defending it to defend it. Because if they don't stop, they're afraid of what that will reflect back on themselves. They can't face their dark sides, letting it consume them. So this is where it gets into the Mercury stuff. This will catch you. So check this out. By not engaging with the real power lines which underlie that is manifesting in our world, those subtle frequencies like theta, we give away our power to really affect change. We become spellbound by the outer manifest forms of the universe, spellbound by the five senses, spellbound by the V, the things that we can see, touch, feel, smell, taste. Once the Wetiko media sufficiently fascinate and catch our attention, we become fastened. What's similar about fascinate and fascism? They are root meaning the same. Fascism, fascinate. To get fascinated with entertainment, propaganda, you fall victim to fascism, dictatorial government control. So once you're fastened, you're held fast to particular viewpoints, which limit the fluidity and mobility of your consciousness and takes away internal freedoms, as if fallen under a spell. Etymologically, the word fascinate, here it is, he actually says it, I knew he did, is related to the words enchantment and bewitchment. And when a group of people or nation falls into mass psychology together, this collective fascination is a form of mass possession or madness, whose underlying psychological dynamic breeds fascism. So everybody not awake to the spells themselves, the mind control agenda, is by virtue participating in this fascist system, unfortunately. Anti-fascist, fascist, whatever. And this is where he also, I thought he brought Mercury into it. Maybe it's on this next page. Yes. So, remember, we've talked on the channel before. We've talked about Mercury. I won't bring it up, actually. I'll just reference the if you go back to, I'll show you these videos, all referenced, these last 3 videos all referenced Mercury very heavily as it relates to fascism and Frederick Tupper Saucy's work to investigate such. So we won't go into that again just to get through this last section of the book. But Mercury and fascism play hand in hand, and Mercury being in retrograde right now, anti-fascists in Mercury retrograde, opposite day kind of effect. They're fascist, right? We've talked about this. Driving it home with steganography, and this is why my work, I hope, resonates so well with people. It gives them this tool set, this cipher, they can decode it. Paul Levy talks specifically to symbols as it relates to the Wetiko virus and why occult symbolism perhaps works so well on dark matters. So he says the symbolic dimension on page 79 is the symbolic dimension of this waking dream of ours, this existence that we are in, is the expression of the interplay between the dreamer, us, and the dream, which is us, and the dreamscape, which is the external world. And he talks about the cybernetic loop. We've talked about what cybernetics are, that is to control the wheel of time. And he talks about how that crystallizes through our conscious awareness. But he says one of the words of the enlightenment of the Tibetan Buddhism, Mahumadra, which is, in addition to translating the great attitude, also translates to the great symbol. And the universe is itself a primordial revelation that is speaking in the language of symbols. And this is why occult symbols are so important. The language of symbols goes much deeper than spelling out words. And it's a living symbolic scripture. Life itself is a living symbolic scripture of the literal and symbolic book of life. The whole of creation is a cosmic text thirsting for interpretation in a living embodiment of the word, manifesting the various names of God. Realizing that all things speak inspires us to develop hermeneutics, reflecting back our realization that the sacred word is being materialized. Hermeticism, hermeneutics, the practice of using hermeticism, just in case that was confusing to anybody. He continues to say, just as God's word spoke the word into existence according to the book of Genesis, now it is through the word that the cosmos can be released from the curse of literal matter, quantitative space, and historical linear time. There he is, again, arguing for historical contexts being falsely interpreted. Our perspective on historical events and time itself is out of view, out of alignment with truth. If the world is not seen as the symbol of itself that it is, like prose that is written in stone, we demythologize the sacred dimension of the world, and the world then solidifies as mute, immutable, faceless, forever collapsing into seemingly concretized objectivity. So if we, in other words, can't reach the spiritual underpinning of this, then the world itself will degrade, as we're seeing. But we have this opportunity now in the degrading to awaken our Super Saiyan qualities and unlock our creativity. Again, more on that in that video I did over on my Patreon channel. Hermeneutics is the practice of interpreting texts, which is kind of what we're doing here a little bit on this channel, right? And it has the task of transfiguration of the world by means of unveiling the word in all things. The word hermeneutics is related to and derived from the Greek god Hermes, also known as Mercury, who is a relative of Wetiko. Communication virus, guys. The Wetiko virus. Ooh. It's a fight on free speech. for this I can't breathe movement, this fight on free speech. They're telling you it's a fight on masks. It's not a fight on masks, it's a diversion. Hermes and Mercury is the god of interpretation and language, among many other things. This is to say that Wetiko is a phenomenon that is related to how we use language and interpret our existence. So with that, that is the segue that I'm going to make into part 2 of this video, where we're going to tie these concepts then into how uncanny the timing is for the PS5 to be coming out, more V-Steganography, and how all of these videos and the trailers of the games that are going to be releasing with this system relate in some way to this Wetiko terminology. And so what is that saying? What is the power that is happening amongst us that Putin is talking about in terms of breaking this Wetiko spell, and perhaps history being a piece of it that we interpret and take on the force of Ahriman itself, maybe. I don't know. Very, very interesting times. But I will see everybody over that wants to go check that Patreon video out over there. I will sign off for now. Keep an eye out for more financial collapse as we head in to July. There may be more stuff. I didn't get to any of that stuff today because it's complex, and honestly, I've told you guys I've been busy. So I'll see you soonish, and love y'all. I'll stay in touch and hope everybody has a great 4th of July at that. Thanks a lot.